Hello and welcome. Yeah, business-driven data warehouse automation. Why? The fun part is a good managed data will make a way more easier data warehouse. But still, when I talk about business-driven data warehouse information, when I even talk about integrating or asking business about data, I often get a, oh my God, please don't do it here response. Because discussing data is always a hard thing to do. And when you venture into business, you will see a lot of problems that don't have anything to do with data. You might have, if it is an older company, you might have two different source systems that are not yet integrated because they came from different companies and they still don't talk to each other and like each other. So that has nothing to do with you or with your data warehouse, but the problems are real for the data warehouse. The integration problems are real. And there's always the perception of the data, which is by the business often different from what's actually happening. And if you venture into these topics, you're always in danger of losing your own goal, because your goal is to create a data warehouse, not an enterprise-wide data model or a data quality initiative or clean up the master data. So all these gathering of information beforehand will slow you down and will create, yeah, it will simply slow you down, and it will create fuss, and you will not be able to actually deliver the data. But the possible gains are quite big. And whenever I venture into business, I usually get a very good result, because finally people talk to each other, and with data comes understanding for the other party. And I even, one time, they changed the whole project after they talked about data. Stuff like this can happen. So it is worthwhile doing it, in my experience. Let's get closer what we can do to actually gain something from that and avoid these topics. So let's start by the very first basics, just to be on the same side. Data warehouse automation is a good thing. And on clean data, it's smooth sailing. The trouble comes in if you need to cleanse the data, if you need to valorize the data, if the integration has to be done for the first time in the data warehouse. These are things that will cost. And in your data warehouse automation tool, you usually have a kind of parts where you can inject functionality, because these kind of things are highly individual and cannot be automated. So what we've done in the last years on data warehouse automation, we kind of created patterns that are always the same and can be infused with metadata to solve a specific problem. And this is a good way to automate. And if we want to go further than current automation, we need more metadata, because then we can create more automated processes. Where do we get this metadata? By integration, by integrate yourself better with the surrounding environment by integrating your data warehouse better into the company. A data warehouse is always a balance of effort and benefit. There is no one perfect way for it. It's always, is it worth the effort? Is the gain worth the effort? And often people are in danger of getting into a debate of the enterprise in data model or stuff like this. Why? Because it's highly helpful for the data warehouse if we have such a thing, but creating it is not on the data warehouse's budget. So you need to find a way to get this information either from initiatives that are already there and just grab their metadata, or you need a way to extract just the information you need and get data that is good enough for processing. Anyway, treat them always as an interface so that on the other side, you have a clear sense of this is not job of the data warehouse. This comes from the outside, and usually it comes from here. In this picture, there is data management containing data governance information, some kind of semantic model, some kind of requirements for the BI. Where do we find such a thing? How can we try and convince somebody to set something up like this? And the fun part is there are ways of helping us. We have the regulations. And it is really funny because I was always under the impression until 2 years ago that I can automate everything up until to the raw word. That was until I met somebody from business and he said, no, you cannot take that data unless I have done some data governance on it. I have to check whether it's person-related data, and I have to check the confidentiality levels, which is something that is that comes into play if you have some information for stock market relevance where you can accidentally release insider information. So he said, we need to look at the data before and clear it for processing or clear it onto which confidentiality level and who can have access to it. And that's a good thing, because now the data needs to be checked and approved, and not only on table level, but on attribute level. This is pure metadata gold. And there is no, there's no such thing like, this needs to be done because it is nice, because it will help us, because we will use data as an asset. No, it's the law. You will have to pay a hefty fine if this goes wrong, and that's a good argument in a discussion. So business needs to look into the data. Do we really should talk data with the business? A data warehouse is always an integrated, time-variant, subject-oriented, non-volatile. You know the drill. It is the data of a part of the company or the company, and it is a central requirement. And if we can't discuss requirement with somebody who requires some report from us, if we can't talk about these requirements with him, we are screwed. So this is a central requirement, so we need to talk about it. And honestly, data modeling does work, but we need to look a bit different onto it than we've done in the past. Data modeling is somewhat like, yeah, it's basically, these are ontologies with relationships. And ontologies in philosophy are 3,000 years old. So I took 3 very old philosophers that worked around ontologies. And the first, and the first one was Aristotle. He basically started defining all the things and put it into ontologies. And that was a very good, that was the base of human understanding. In the 1600s, people put that out again, and it helped them to define the world. It's, if you look at early ontologies or some ontologies, they always have errors, but the discussion behind it, the understanding, that is something that helped. And it helped to cross language barriers as well, because you can have a direct translation, you can agree on it. And so that was a vehicle that is highly helpful, but not really perfect. And this is where Plato said, if I have a campfire in a cave, is the reality the person behind the campfire or the shadow behind the person on the wall of the cave? So he was questioning, can we have a complete definition without seeing everything? And yeah, it's true. And we can use that to get a more complete picture. But that means we have to give more leniency on the universe of discourse. Consent is something like, I can live with it. We no longer discuss what is the right definition of a customer. We agree that a customer resides in that table. And if it isn't somebody who's interested, then the following attributes are there to describe him. A long-term customer is described by the following attributes. So we find easy ways to work with these definitions by allowing everybody to have their own definition, but defining it on top of the on top of a very, very basic definition. And now you can see differences. You can understand how somebody thinks. And that's a beautiful thing, because it helps you understanding the person and it helps you navigating the course. And there's another thing for not being 100%, but rather going with good enough. And that's Heraclit. He said everything flows. If you put your foot into the river, it's always a different river because it's different water. The water from the last time is already at the sea. So you have to accept constant change anyway. And in kind of a way, Data Vault accommodates this, because in the business world, I am allowed to have different views on the same topic. And with that support, I can not cut corners, but I can do a data modeling that gives us just enough understanding to get the results straight. And people learn anyway. So the definition next year will be always slightly different. We can work with that. And therefore, if we now have something like a data management running outside, we can get the metadata for our core warehouse schema. We can get the confidentiality classes, the GDPR, the access rules, and we can define KPIs and dimensions. And even here, the question is, yeah, if I have such a easy conceptual model, this is an example, and it's a very well-defined example because it has way too much attributes already in there. Usually it's just business objects, but basically here we have the product, we have the customer, we have orders, an order item, and then the delivery schedule where it is sent to a customer. This is for for sending out garden plants and seeds. And in here we have a product, and this product will become a hub. And now if we map the sources against it and we stick to early integration, we will populate our robot quite neatly according to this. Still, we will have to do some more checking later on, but it's basically we either have one source table, one hub, everything's right. You have n source tables to one hub. We have to do a lot of integration probably afterwards because we will all load all into one hub. We have one source is several hubs. We have to split up our source, and that's always a difficult thing. But for supertype like party, it's very easy to do. If you have a denormalized one, you can do it as long as there is the data quality is good enough. That means the header that you normalize is always the same across all orders. But if that is 99% accurate, you can go for it. Or you have JSON files where you have encapsulated data. But then you have to do the normalization part after loading because, again, it's probably not highly integrated. Anything else, you need to load it and correct it into the business world. And if you look at this, it's fairly easy to automate the the raw vault, because now I get from the business side my conceptual model with my business objects, the relationships, the dependent business objects. On this, I get personal information identification, confidentiality levels, access roles, and hopefully some mapping of the business objects to source systems via data catalog. And then I have the source system view, the table view. And by using the mapping or creating the mapping, I can now bring this together and easily set up the raw vault schema and the mapping. And I could put that one into my automation tool. So by doing so, I can create another layer of automation on top of my automation tool by reusing data governance data. And that doesn't stop on the way in. On the way out, I have to do some small definitions. On the way out, I have usually 3 fact types: transaction grain, periodic snapshot grain, accumulating. Transaction means it's a point in time. So the transaction time defines the reporting time of the fact in the table. Or it's a periodic snapshot grain where I go into a certain time. If I can assign that to a KPI, it's fairly clear how to build the fact table. And the same thing on the measures side. If I divide measures by origin or creation, I can always say base measures. These are the ones that come directly from the core warehouse, turnover, number of contracts, and they go into a fact table that is brought in on the smallest grain with all of the available dimension information. And on top of that, I can build derived measures, something that is calculated. And then in the front end, I get the calculated measures, and they are in the front end because basically it's quotas, and you can't pre-calculate quotas on a database. So if you do something like, if you follow these definitions, it's fairly easy to formalize the way out by defining a base measure and specify a fact type, and then you can auto select all the N-to-1 hubs as dimensions. I know Data Vault only has many-to-many relationships, but the underlying information often is just a one-to-many relationship. And if you know that, you can use them easily to build your data marts. And then you have to specify whether your dimension is S is, that means always the current value, or if you want to have the dimension in the value of the fact type origination. And again, you can feed that into your automation tool. So business driven can deliver us more metadata to enhance current data warehouse automation, to go even further. And by doing so, we need to embrace the data model as underlying requirement. Data modeling is never perfect, so look for good enough. Go for consent in the terms of I can live with that. And then only create the metadata you create on your own can only be metadata that you really need. Everything else is unnecessary. If you have to create metadata, make an interface and tell everybody that somebody else should be doing it. It's fairly easy to do that on stuff like GDPR, because you can get very loud about it. But that's today usually not an issue. But you can bring people to enhance the current way of handling GDPR so that it will create input for you. And the understanding of the data model will allow them to actually manage their data, to use data to enhance their business. And still, after all this, please try and do a fast first delivery with minimum addendum, just to prove that you can deliver data and enhance your credibility.